Welcome to The Bold New Normal, the podcast where bold ideas meet transformative action. I'm your host, Lucy Quist, and I'm here to challenge mindsets, ignite conversations, and inspire you to create the future you deserve. A future where equity, opportunity, and prosperity are not just dreams but realities. So let's dive in and build the bold new normal together. Earlier this year, as part of International Women's Month, I had the awesome opportunity to speak at the International Women's Leadership Conference in Dubai, hosted by Mrs. Ibukun Awusika. Now, if you know Mrs. Awusika, then you know that she's comparable to none. I was asked to speak about living the corporate dream, but I think this time you'll be surprised that I didn't take the normal, usual approach to sharing the highlights of my journey story. What really goes on behind the scenes as we walk that corporate journey? I invite you to walk along that journey with me as you listen. Enjoy. Good morning. So many distinguished ladies and gentlemen in this room today, all protocols observed. And I'm excited that there's so many powerful women that I know in this room that I hope to get some time with before I leave. I apologize that I'm only here for the day. It will be clearer as I speak as to why, but I did start a new job on Monday, so it kind of made it difficult for me to honor the full 3 days. First, want to say thank you to you all that you're going to lend me your attention, but a very important thank you to Mrs. Ibukun Awusika. We love you, we admire you. You possibly may underestimate your impact. I know you know you're impactful, but Mrs. Awusika was one of these women that some of us always thought it'd be great to meet her one day. And I remember having the privilege of moderating a panel that she was on quite a number of years ago. So she may or may not remember, but it was in Paris. And I was so excited about that. And so last year when she reached out to me, and I'll explain that in a bit, to speak today, I felt truly honored. You know, we meet people we admire and they inspire us, and we think that there are many things about them that we want to be. And thankfully, God made us all unique. And so while there'll never be another Mrs. Awusika, and we're all individuals, there's something that she has said that I believe was definitely speaking to me and hopefully to many of you. And I paraphrase her words in saying that she wants to leave this life spent. And I completely identify with that thought because God has invested so much into each and every single one of us at birth, but also throughout our journeys. And wouldn't it be such a shame to return to him with change? I don't want to give him change. I want him to give me something new when this is all said and done. So as I prepared for today, I thought, Lucy, you've spoken in so many different rooms, so many different forums around the world. Today, for me, is about vulnerability. Because while we do get to talk about living the dream in the context of the corporate world, is what I'm going to focus on, we don't always get the opportunity to share our struggles, our challenges, our insecurities, our failures, the times we were crying and somebody had to pick us up. And you always get the nice sort of intro and bio about how amazing and wonderful you supposedly are. Now, I'm not going to give you Bible quotations as I go through this, but I do want you to level set with me. I'm a Bible-believing, studying, practicing Christian. So there's nothing I'm going to say to you that is outside of that. And sometimes it takes being reminded. Yesterday, my oldest son turned 21. And a friend of mine was reminding me, she said, where did the years go? Lucy, remember when you were pregnant and we decided to read the book of Esther to prepare? I'm like, we did? I didn't even remember that. But the point is that it is an integral part of my life. I won't keep repeating it. You'll probably hear it as I speak, but that's our level set. So what is this dream? What is this corporate dream that I supposedly have? Which is why I get permission to speak to you today. You know, I was born to two very unremarkable people, and I say that lovingly and kindly. My dad was born in a Ghanaian village in the Ashanti region. My mom was born in a Ghanaian village in Greater Accra. They're both born in villages. The story of how they met is a whole other story, but what's interesting about my parents is that They come from different parts of the country, so they come from different sorts of cultural backgrounds. And my dad was super intellectual, the only one of his family who would go on to university because his mother believed, there's a whole backstory around how it happened, but she believed that this one child was the child she was going to support, whilst his father believed that this was the one child who shouldn't go to school and actually should be trained traditionally only. So women, your power is immense, because if she hadn't made those choices, there wouldn't be me, certainly not. And so he went to university and studied engineering. Now, my mother, for her part, was the only one of her siblings who went to school. She was the youngest child of her mother. She went to school, and she tells me how, at some point growing up, she really didn't want to go to school any longer because she didn't see the point. Nobody else went to school, so why was she stuck in this thing called school? And her grandfather, my mom is in her 70s now, her grandfather told her that if you don't go to school, who's going to buy the tobacco from my pipe? That's proverbially speaking. He was speaking to her. And so she understood that she had a responsibility to be in school. So the remarkable thing about my unremarkable father was the fact that he was really smart, and so education became his thing. The remarkable thing about my seemingly unremarkable mother is that she was a dreamer. I cannot to this day understand how she managed to dream these dreams. So she'd tell me how she'd be in her village and she'd see a plane pass over, and she'd be like, oh, one day I'm going to see the world. And I'm like, but you're in a village, you haven't made it to Accra. So how are you thinking about the world? Let's start with how we make it to Accra. But these two people's lives and ethos became the underpinning of my life. And they would subsequently meet in Accra through work. So they did make it to Accra and leave Ghana and go and follow well. She ended up marrying the person who would actually be part of the vehicle to fulfill those dreams of seeing the world. And so I ended up being born to these parents in the United Kingdom many years ago. And we'll come back to those years soon. It was an exciting life I had with my parents, but my parents always yearned to be on the African continent. They were always these people who would always tell stories about how much they missed home, how much their life they wanted to be in Africa. And so when I was 7 years old, we moved to Nigeria. Nigeria was my first real home on the African continent, where I made real friends. I lived in Lagos as a 7-year-old child, and we were there for a couple of years. And we wouldn't have left Lagos if it hadn't been for the fact that in 1983, Nigeria said Ghana must go. And because Ghana had to go, we had to go to Ghana. Now, in 1983, it was a difficult year for Ghana because you had 1 million Ghanaians, myself included, who had arrived. The rains had failed. So many things had gone wrong for the country economically. And so there I was, this child who had a relatively okay middle-class life, arrived in Ghana and really ended up with a life that was really at the bottom of the pile because my parents, I've told you, they came from these villages. They didn't have connections. They didn't know people. And in those days, even staple food items were scarce. You had to know the right people. And as a 9-year-old, I would sit and I would wonder, I do spend a lot of time in my head to this day, how did we get here as a country? And I didn't have big fancy words, but I said to myself that when I grow up, I want to become one of those adults who's in a position to make choices and decisions that positively impact people's lives. It's a very simple statement. I didn't have fancy words like leader, CEO, whatever word you call it. I just understood that the people in charge had a responsibility, and when I grow up, I want to be one of those people who make a difference and a better life for everyone around me. And so my dream was born when I was 9 years old. And as I walk through and as I've journeyed through life, my dream has just become refined and better understood by myself, to the point of being able to share it with other people. And my dream now has a name. My dream is called The Bold New Normal. My dream is articulated in a book to be clear on what I actually mean by my dream. And my dream is encapsulated and re-articulated annually in a conference. Now, the reason why I shared this sort of backstory and how I came to the dream with you is that then provides the inspiration to persist in a career that provides the platform to live the dream. Make sense? So what I'd encourage you to do as I tell you about my career, which is all in fulfillment of my dream, is if something connects, something makes sense, something is an aha, write a note, take it down. Because as we share our journey stories, there are elements that connect and make sense to people that will be relevant to you and may not be relevant to someone else, but ultimately, everyone gets something out of a story that they hear. While we have great dreams and dreams are necessary, I believe we also need to be visionary. And when I say visionary, I mean, Bolaji talked about vision boards. I like to have a vision for at least for the next 5 years. But when I was much younger, I had bigger dreams that went longer than 5 years. But now as an adult, I like to have a 5-year dream. For my children, I like to make sure that we set out what they're actually going to achieve in any given year. And so my first vision that I had to fulfill was I really wanted to become an engineer. Now, we still live in a world where participation of young women in anything that's STEM oriented is still scarce. Our participation percentages are really low, in many cases in single digits. And so it took determination, tenacity, and focus to sustain that dream. Because after several years in Ghana, a decade long, and after getting through secondary school, I went back to the UK. When I went to the UK, I joined the formal workforce as a 19-year-old. I couldn't afford to go straight to university, so I went to work. And I was working in engineering, I was working in manufacturing, but the interesting thing was that so many people around me consistently told me that when people arrive here, they never leave. You may have this great dream of becoming an engineer, but it's actually never going to happen because you're going to get caught up in all that you earn, your life is going to start, and you're never going to actually become an engineer. And I was so determined that that vision will be born. And so even when I had to work 3 shifts, on a night shift, I would go to work in tears. I hated working at night. I was young. I didn't see why I should be working in a factory at night, but I persisted because I had this vision. And so sometimes we have to go through the tears and the crying to get to where we want to be. Fast forward a number of years after becoming an engineer, I spent a decade long working with Ford Motor Company and realized that I knew so much about engineering, but I knew very little about anything else. Whether it was finance, whether it was commercial, whether it was marketing. I was very narrow. I knew what it meant to be an engineer, and that's all I knew. And so I decided that I needed to go to business school. For me, every vision has a purpose. I didn't want to go to business school to say I had a business degree. I wanted to go to business school because I needed the knowledge. Now, by this time, I was married, I had a child, and I wanted to go to business school. And so second thing I would tell you about fighting through the challenges and struggles is that a lot of the time, it takes an army, it takes a village to achieve what we want to achieve in our careers. But in my case, I believe that while it takes a village and an army, somebody needs to be in charge. Don't make it a communal activity that everybody's in charge of, whether it's your child or your life or what you're working on. And so I went to business school in France with my husband commuting practically every weekend to support me, with my mother, the dreamer, adding another country to her list of countries where she has visited by coming to live with me in France. And so for that year, she stayed, she mothered me and my child as I studied. I came out of business school, went into financial services, left financial services, and moved into telecommunications on the African continent. When I came into telecommunications in 2008, I quickly set my next vision goal, and that was to become the CEO of a telecommunications company. It was in 2008, I remember so well, and I had my end of year review with my boss.
And he said to me, what do you want? What's your goal? And I said, well, I want your job. Now in hindsight, I think, did you really say that? But I did, because it was the truth. The good news was that he was a good-natured man who really believed in me. And of course, all these stories I'm compressing in the interest of time. But then was when the challenge started. Because it's one thing to say how wonderfully you want to be a CEO. You've got to prove to a corporation that you can be a CEO. No one makes you a CEO because you're nice, you're wonderful. As my boss said, look, your business degree, it's a calling card. It doesn't mean anything. Show me what you can actually do. And so I went from a position of having a relatively significant job in terms of the global African landscape in my boss's world, because he was the CEO of Africa, to a job where it was really detailed, hands-on. I was responsible for half of Ghana to grow the business commercially, but my family lived in Accra and I had to be based in Kumasi. And so every single week I would get on a plane from Accra to Kumasi on Monday. I would spend the week in Kumasi the entire week and come home on Friday. Needed that village again, didn't I? Because by this time, I had 3 little children in my house, my 2 sons and my niece who were raising. Now, I had people literally come and sit with me and say, Lucy, and they meant well, great colleagues. They said to me, you're ambitious and, you like to, go places, but I don't know why you're doing this. I mean, you had a great job. And why would you allow yourself to be put in a position where now you have to hustle, you have to go to all these towns and villages and make sure sales are happening and so on. But I knew what I wanted. So in your journey, not everybody is going to be an encourager, but it doesn't make them a bad person. They're highlighting to you maybe a sacrifice, a choice, a risk that they wouldn't take, something they wouldn't do. And that's okay. It's so that when you're facing difficulties, you're doing something that others wouldn't do. Doesn't make them bad. That's one thing I've learned, that if you hear something which is not what you want to hear, don't immediately emotionally translate it into that person has it in for you or that person is against you. Well, things went really, really well with this position in Kumasi to turn the business around. And so for my reward, I was sent to work in the DRC, again with my children. So you're getting the picture here that even though I said in 2008 that I wanted to become a telecom CEO, there's a wide, long list of different opportunities, challenging opportunities, risk-bearing opportunities that I had to take with the support of my family to actually prove that I could be a telecom CEO. And I remember the first time I was offered an opportunity to be a telecom CEO, I didn't take it. Because I looked at the opportunity in a country on this continent. I looked at where my children were in their journey and their age. I knew that I would be removed from them for so long, and they are my priority. I mean, I can tell you how ambitious I am, but they are my priority. Nothing comes before them because ultimately they get one mother. That's the point. And my role is to shape them into what God has created them to be. So make no mistake, being CEO does not come before my children. I don't have to tell my employer that. I don't have to tell everybody that, but I know my decision criteria. So the first time I said no. And the difficulty with saying no to a great opportunity is that when you have a bad day, you think, why didn't I just take that job? I mean, look at these people talking to me anyhow today when I could have been the CEO. And so I moved on from that company and went to work with another company who actually also promised me and said, look, you have what it takes to be CEO. We think you can get there. But then when my boss changed from the one who said I could be CEO, the new boss said, you're so far away from being CEO. I don't even know why you're thinking about being CEO. Cried. I have to be honest, I cried. And I remember so well one of my colleagues, and I will name her, and by the way, if you're not from Nigeria in this room, and you don't have a good friend who's Nigerian, get yourself a Nigerian friend. No, honestly, I know we're outnumbered here. That's not why I'm saying that. Look, some of the people who have done the biggest pushes in my life are Nigerian. Look, they will tell you what time it is. So I'm going to name this friend. So my friend Uche, who was my colleague, we were supposed to be all trying to get to be CEO. I remember we got to this crux time, and she said to me, we were all like, oh, this company is not happening. We need to move on. Uche was like, Lucy, I'm telling you, if a recruiter calls and it's not for a CEO job, don't pursue the conversation. That's not where we are right now. That's not what the time it is right now. And I'm looking at him thinking, girl, I mean, is that how we roll now? She says, yes, seriously, we're not doing this. If it's not a CEO call, we're not picking the call. End of. Right? Have the courage to have someone who challenges you. Have that courage. And have the courage to learn from the person. At least one woman that you believe in and that you learn. Have the humility to say she knows something I do. Even if she's your peer and she's not your senior. Because those words have stayed. Now when I tell her, she's like, you listen to me too much. I'm like, no, I listen to you well. Now, the reason why I've seemingly sort of whizzed through all these challenges and all these difficulties to tell you about my journey is that our journeys end up being celebrated when we're seen to do something amazing and something awesome. And so in 2014, it finally happened. I was made telecom CEO. And I'll be honest with you, the thing that I hadn't realized was that people would care about the fact that I was a woman. I actually hadn't thought about this. The thing I had thought about actively was that people would say I was young. And so age was my concern. Now let me put it into context for you. I started working when I was 19 years old. So I was very young when I started working. So by the time I became telecom CEO at 39, I actually had a lot of experience. But to everybody else, 39 sounds pretty young. That was what I thought would be the biggest concern. People didn't care about that. Stop worrying. They cared about being the fact that I was a woman and obviously celebrated it. But I'm encouraging you not to worry about what people think, whether it is your age, your gender, your height, your beauty, your darkness, your whatever it is. That's not your burden. It's not your burden and yours to carry. I'm coming to the crux of why I feel I was called to speak today. I left Airtel after 3.5 years and we did a merger. I wrote a book, The Bold New Normal. I did some work in football and then I got a job in financial services, so I moved back to London. And altogether, I spent 4 years in financial services that time around, and I walked away in 2023. So in 2023, with no one telling me to, I left my job. It was probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do, especially when you're used to people say, oh, she's doing this, she's doing that, she's doing that. But I reached a point in my journey where I felt spent. There was nothing left.
Wow. You were surprised at where that ended, weren't you? I told you this talk was different. It was one that was from the heart, and it was warts and all sharing the journey. The question is, where do we go from here? What happened next? Look out for part 2 as I tell you what happened in the most recent phase of my corporate journey. Thank you for tuning in to The Bold New Normal. I hope this episode has inspired you to think boldly and take action towards creating the future you envision. If you found value in today's conversation, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who needs a dose of boldness today. Until next time, take action to create your bold new normal.